Welcome to the deep dive. Now, usually we're wading through thick policy documents, maybe tracing historical fault lines or sorting through huge piles of scientific data. But today we're doing something, well, completely different. We're taking the whole deep dive approach and applying it to just one very short piece of creative work.
That's right. It's just 8 lines. Could be a poem, maybe song lyrics. It was written back in 1997 by someone named Sharbell, who was only 17 at the time. And the title alone, it really grabs you. The beginning is the end. And yeah, it's incredibly short, but wow, it is just packed with these huge philosophical ideas, existential weight, things you usually see writers wrestle with over, entire careers much later in life.
Exactly. So our mission today is kind of like being forensic literary critics, I suppose. We're going to try and unpack the themes, the language, and honestly, the surprising sort of emotional maturity in this text. We do need to mention up front, though, something we learned from the context. English isn't Sharbell's first language, and that's pretty crucial here. We're not here to critique grammar or, poetic technique in the usual sense. We're trying to look past any, let's say, surface imperfections in the language and get straight to the clarity, the kind of urgency of the thinking behind it.
Absolutely. And sometimes that constraint, writing in a language that's not your native one, it actually strips away the fancy stuff. The clever phrasing that can sometimes hide a pretty shallow idea. Here, it feels like it almost forces Sharbell to focus purely on the core concept. What you get is this really raw, essential statement, a distilled worldview. And like you said, it's surprisingly mature for a 17-year-old.
Yeah, my first reaction, seeing that title, The Beginning is the End, it just hit me with this feeling of, wow, deep fatalism. Such an intense paradox. It sort of throws out our basic need for things to go in a straight line, for progress. It's like saying there's no real journey, just a destination that, well, that was the starting point anyway. It basically collapsed the whole life experience into one single, maybe predetermined point.
And that title works perfectly as the central argument, the thesis. Rhetorically, that structure A is B, where A and B are total opposites. It's a kind of chiasmus. It gives it this feeling of finality structurally, even before you read line 1. So our job is to see how the next 7 lines build the case, this sort of philosophical proof for this conclusion you just can't escape, that the start and the finish are the same thing. This tiny text, it tackles time, identity, morality, destiny, all head on. It delivers a complete, if maybe a bit somber, philosophical framework.
Okay, all right, let's dig into the argument then, line by line. We start with that main idea from the title, the cycle, the determined fate, and that takes us right into line 1. Nothing was and will never be.
Wow. That's just such a clean, definite break from how we usually think. It's not just like personal sadness. It feels like an assertion of a genuine existential void.
It's an incredibly powerful opening, mostly because it's so absolute, isn't it? Nothing was. That just wipes out the past immediately. No history, no origin, no divine creation story. It suggests this permanent nothingness that surrounds our little blip of perception. And then when you add "and will never be," well, the future's gone too.
So all we're left with is just the fleeting moment of is. I wonder, should we read this as pure nihilism, with the capital N, like the ultimate statement that existence just has no objective meaning, no value, no real purpose? If our reality is just bookended by nothingness, then the whole human project, all our effort, ambition, it's kind of pointless, isn't it? That's definitely one way to read it. You could see it rooted in that sort of dramatic teenage realization of mortality. But thinking about the title again, that circle of time, there might be a more nuanced philosophical angle. This line could be making a statement about the nature of reality itself, maybe reflecting certain, non-Western ideas where reality is seen as constantly dissolving and reforming. The past and future, the way we imagine them linearly, they're just ideas in our head that dissolve back into the big nothing. All that's left is the eternal now. It immediately sets a really somber mood. It pushes you away from ideas of progress or, leaving a legacy.
That's a key distinction, yeah. Nihilism as despair versus nihilism as just. A statement about how reality is, it's a really strong opening. It just refuses to give any weight to the timelines we usually rely on. Okay, so from that existential void, we move straight into the moral landscape with line 2. Things are bad and sins are free. The first part feels straightforward. The world's in a bad state, morally decaying, maybe just deeply disappointing, but sins are free. Now that's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit tricky.
Yeah, that phrase does have a potential linguistic ambiguity, which, like you said, we have to consider, given Sharbell wasn't a native speaker. What exactly does free mean here? There are really 2 strong possibilities, and they paint very different moral pictures.
Okay, let's look at both. My first thought, especially coming off that fatalistic first line, is that sins are free means free from consequence. Moral license. In a universe that's already determined, where reality is defined by nothingness, maybe the usual costs of sin, damnation, shame, being kicked out of society, they just don't apply anymore. Sins are free because there's no system left to enforce any kind of moral rules. It's like moral entropy has set in.
That's a really compelling reading, and it definitely supports that overall tone of bleak acceptance. If you follow that idea, it suggests something quite sophisticated, actually. The author's saying that without consequences, morality just kind of collapses. But let's push back on that a bit. Could it be simpler, given the language context? Could Sharbell just mean sins are common, widely available, maybe cheap to commit, like they're everywhere, maybe handed out freely by this flawed world?
That reading sins are easy or cheap, that actually weakens the moral license idea, doesn't it? If sins are just common and easy, it sounds more like a critique of society. Look how easy it is to do wrong. Look how widespread moral failure is.
It could be. But if we lean into the fatalism that seems central to the piece, that moral license reading feels maybe a bit stronger. If your fate is already sealed, then nothing you do, good or bad, can actually change the outcome. So sins are free because they're just irrelevant to your destiny, which was set from the very beginning. It sort of justifies living without worrying about morality, because morality itself has been made meaningless by fate.
Right, okay. And this sort of inherent moral gloominess, this lack of consequence, it leads perfectly into the absolute purest statement of determinism in line 3. It is what it was and will always be. This line mirrors the title exactly, but applies it to the state of reality itself. It denies change. It denies progress. It's saying the present is just a rerun of the past and an unavoidable preview of the future.
This really is the core of the fatalism, isn't it? It suggests a universe where time isn't like a river flowing forwards, but more like a solid block, where all moments, past, present, future, they all just exist together, unchangingly. It's the badness of things, the freedom of sins. They're permanent features of existence. You can't fix them. The statement is so clean, so absolute. It just leaves no space for hope in things like transformation or struggle or redemption.
Wow. That sounds almost unbearable. If nothing ever changes, if morality doesn't matter, if existence starts and ends with the void, how does a person even cope with that psychological weight? And Sharbell gives us the answer, like, immediately in line 4. This is a really crucial turn. I am who I am. I am the same me.
Right.
Suddenly, we shift completely from the external determined world to the internal resolute self.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Despite all the chaos around the void, the free sins, the unchangeable fate, the author insists on a core identity, something consistent, stable. The world might be a mess, but the me inside is somehow immune to falling apart. It's like an anchor point in this incredibly turbulent universe.
I read that as the key moment of internal resolution. It's almost a defiant statement, like self-preservation against universal entropy. It's like saying, okay, fine, I accept the outside world is fixed and unchanging, but its chaos can't touch my core identity. I stay the same.
Wow.
It's accepting your own unchanging nature as the only stability you've got.
And this is where, again, the simplicity that might come from the non-native language really works. The phrase, I am the same me. It's not trying to be fancy or poetic. It's just a statement of absolute stripped-down truth. It suggests this kind of foundational self, the essential I, that resists being defined by the outside. And it creates this really powerful contrast. External instability is a given, but internal resolution is just as certain. The self is the only constant you can find inside this unbendable loop of fate.
Okay, so if we put the first 4 lines together, Sharbell's built a foundation. A fatalistic, predetermined, morally kind of bankrupt world in lines 1 to 3, countered only by this fiercely declared, consistent inner self in line 4. It's a very tight logical package, especially from a 17-year-old.
Right. And moving into the second section, Sharbell pivots a bit. He moves from these direct philosophical statements about fate and identity to exploring the concepts using metaphors. Metaphors for life and time itself. And this is where he brings in some really dense visual and quite paradoxical imagery to kind of illustrate his worldview.
Yeah, it kicks off straight away with this incredibly deep dual metaphor in line 5. Old rope is life, and life is wind. We've got 2 really powerful images here, but they seem to contradict each other, used to define what life is. We should probably spend some real time unpacking this duality. It's arguably the most poetic line in the whole piece.
Let's do that. Let's start with the first bit. Rope is life. Okay, rope. Rope is structural, right? You use it to bind things, connect things, maybe measure distances. It suggests a limited structure, maybe a tether or a specific path you have to follow. But the key word there is old. Old rope. That immediately suggests weariness, fragility, strain. Maybe it's near the end of its usefulness.
Yeah.
So the structure that binds you, your life, it's failing. It feels heavy, burdened by its past, maybe close to snapping.
Okay, if we follow that life is a structure, but it's failing that, immediately kind of undermines ideas of ambition or strength or legacy, doesn't it? Life isn't some sturdy pillar. It's more like a frayed connection about to give way. And then you contrast that immediately with the second metaphor. Life is wind. Wind is the ultimate anti-structure. It suggests impermanence, movement that leaves no trace, invisibility, and something totally uncontrollable. You can't hold on to wind.
Exactly. So when you put old rope and wind together, the synthesis creates this image of being constrained and dissolving at the exact same time. Life is something holding you to a place or a system or your fate. That's the old rope. But that very structure is also completely intangible, fleeting, constantly slipping away. That's the wind. It perfectly captures that inner conflict of feeling trapped on a predetermined path, the old rope of fate, while knowing that the actual substance of your experience is totally ephemeral, like the wind.
That's a really masterful image. The old rope could be history, burden, material reality, while the wind is more like the soul, the spirit, the fundamental lack of substance. It feels like Sharbell's telling us that life feels simultaneously weighed down by its own past and completely unanchored in the present.
And this complex grasp of existence then leads into the psychological stance he takes in line 6. Nothing is sure because mystery is a friend. If life is this worn-out, fleeting thing, well then certainty is impossible. But the author doesn't fight that uncertainty. He actually embraces it. He personifies it, even calls it a friend.
Yeah, instead of fearing the unknown, which is, the normal human thing, leading to anxiety and looking for false certainties, he finds comfort there. For a 17-year-old wrestling with these heavy, maybe doom-laden ideas, this friendship with mystery, it must be the way to cope with the deep fatalism we saw in line 3, and we'll see again in line 7.
It connects directly back to that idea of the unbendable circle. If the truth that your destiny is fixed, time is rigid. If that truth is too stark, too bleak maybe to face alone, you need a companion. And mystery offers comfort precisely because it denies the sort of crushing finality of that certainty. It allows for a little pocket of possibility within the certainty of fate. You know the outcome is fixed, but maybe you don't know the exact how or when, and that little gap, that's where you can find some peace.
That's an incredibly mature philosophical move, isn't it? It's basically saying, look, I accept I can't know the whole plan, and since the plan is probably pretty bleak anyway, not knowing the details actually brings me some comfort. Mystery becomes this necessary psychological buffer against how rigid the universe feels.
Which brings us logically right back to the rigidity of the universe in line 7. Time is a circle, and circles never bend. This is the definitive statement. It anchors all the fatalism and the cyclic imagery that came before. It's a total rejection of linear time, which is so dominant in, Western thinking. The idea of history moving forward, progress, a clear start, and a clear endpoint.
The idea of time being cyclical, where things repeat, that's ancient, of course. But Sharbell adds this crucial, almost mathematical constraint. Circles never bend. It gives the cycle this fixed, geometric, unbreakable quality. It's not just a gentle loop. It feels more like an iron prison.
And the implications of that rigidity, they're pretty devastating for ideas like free will or even hope.
Yeah.
If the circle never bends, then all our struggles, all the temporary wins or losses, they're just destined to fit into this closed, unbendable loop. Imagine time as a physical track. This track is absolutely fixed. Every single move you make is just another point on its circumference.
And if you think about this from the perspective of the 17-year-old author, it means the mistakes he sees adults making, the flaws in society he pointed out, things are bad. They aren't temporary problems we can solve with progress. They're permanent structural features of the circle itself. The past will always come back, and the future is doomed to repeat the past.
It creates this totally closed system. The energy inside is finite, just constantly recycling. The rope is old, life is like wind, and the time loop cannot be bent. The coherence of this worldview, delivered in just these few short lines, it's really quite impressive.
Okay, so the stage is definitely set now. We've got external fatalism, internal consistency, life is fleeting, time is rigid. Now we get to the final line, line 8, which feels like it provides the grand synthesis, the ultimate philosophical proof for the title itself.
Line 8 starts with this really powerful, very concentrated statement. The son is a father. Yeah. Now on the surface, okay, that's just the biological cycle, right? Roles changing across generations. But in the context of this cyclical, unbendable time we've been discussing, The statement just collapses temporal progression completely.
Let's dig into that collapsing of time a bit more. Usually we think of the son becoming the father. The process happens over decades. But Sharbell uses the verb is, the son is the father. Now, that suggests the destiny, the responsibilities, maybe the limitations, the whole endpoint of the son. It's already fully contained, fully realized within the identity of the father right now.
It almost denies that unique identity we talked about back in line 4, I am the same me. Or maybe it reframes it. It suggests that the persistence of the self is just the persistence of the role that fate has assigned you. The son and the father aren't separate points on a line anymore. They become simultaneous truths existing within the circle.
Yeah, that speaks volumes about the potential psychological weight for a 17-year-old. Transitioning into adulthood isn't a journey of discovery or creating yourself. It's just fulfilling a script that was already written. His youthful self is already kind of a ghost of the man he's predetermined to become. The future self is already imprinted on the current self. It just reinforces the absolute rigidity of that unbendable path from line 7.
If the son is the father, then yeah, the roles are just interchangeable. The cycle is perfect, closed. There's no escaping the predetermined duty, whatever that might be. It's a statement about predestined roles and the complete lack of individual deviation. The moment you begin life as a son, it already contains the conclusion of life as the father.
And this realization that the roles are fixed, the transformation is inevitable, this leads us straight to the final, definitive conclusion, which is, of course, a restatement, a reaffirmation of the title, and the beginning is the end. This is the moment where the whole structure just pays off. It lands.
It really serves as the final, absolute proof for the idea Sharbell started with. All the concepts we've unpacked, the unchanging self, the certainty of fate, the moral entropy, the collapsing roles, they all just flow into this one final, undeniable truth. It's a philosophical deduction that feels both, well, chilling, but also completely self-contained. The 8 lines themselves form a perfect loop, mirroring the circle they describe.
Let's just think about how well that restatement works here. It's not just echoing the title for poetic effect. It feels like a necessary logical conclusion. The void from line 1, the inevitable moral decay in line 2, they now seem like logical outcomes of this closed loop. The fragility of life in line 5 doesn't really matter because the outcome is fixed anyway. And that necessary friendship with mystery in line 6, that's how you endure the rigid conclusion that, yep, the son is the father.
The overall tone, right at the end, it feels like profound, resigned acceptance. It kind of avoids the usual emotional fireworks of teenage angst, doesn't it? It's not screaming against fate, it's just stating fate as an established fact, something observed and accepted. For Sharbell, navigating these really complex philosophical ideas and then translating them, the ability to boil this dense worldview down into just 8 lines is, well, it's extraordinary. It really confirms that the clarity of philosophical thought can absolutely cut across barriers of language and age.
It feels almost mathematical in its certainty. Like you said, it doesn't rage against the machine. It just states that the machine's gears were set a long time ago, and they're just going to turn forever in the same unbendable direction. Hashtag key takeaways and final thought. Okay, so after really digging deep into these 8 lines of serious philosophical density, let's try and sum up the 4 core themes Sharbell packed into this powerful little text. We definitely found absolute fatalism, that belief destiny is set. We saw cyclical time, that radical rejection of linear progress. There was the asserted identity, that fierce declaration of a consistent inner self surviving the external chaos. And finally, that acceptance of mystery, using the unknown itself as a source of necessary psychological comfort.
And we really have to keep circling back to the context, don't we? This is the voice of a 17-year-old, the maturity, the complexity of these ideas, especially filtered through a second language. It really speaks to this powerful internal philosophical urgency. We have to assume this wasn't just an academic exercise for him. It was likely the raw distillation of how he saw the world. And maybe those language constraints actually helped, forcing him to strip away any poetic fluff and get right down to the essential raw truth of his feeling. Made him be ruthlessly concise.
Yeah, it's like an example of linguistic limitations creating philosophical freedom, in a way. He uses pretty simple vocabulary to talk about these huge concepts. You see echoes of ideas from great thinkers on determinism, fate, the closed-loop universe stuff that usually takes volumes to explain, and he condenses it into something immediate, punchy, and totally memorable.
And the value of analyzing this text, for you listening, is that it shows how profoundly philosophical statements can be distilled. It's almost like a shortcut to grasping some really complex existential ideas. It shows that intellectual weight doesn't always depend on length or complex grammar, but on the clarity and the internal consistency of the idea itself. Sharbell gives us a whole, fully functioning universe in just 8 lines.
He presents this universe defined by repetition and fate, where your role is predetermined, but somehow your internal self stays consistent. It really challenges us, maybe, to look at our own lives not just as a sequence of unique events, but maybe as points along some kind of inevitable curve.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. If Sharbell's final conclusion is true, if the beginning really is the end, and time is this unbendable circle, then, mathematically speaking, our choices are just confirmations of a destiny that's already set. But there's a nuance in that cyclical nature. If the cycle repeats infinitely, you're forced to relive the same moments, the same failures, the same small wins, endlessly.
So the ultimate question for you as an individual becomes, where do you find meaning in that? Since your actions can't actually change the loop, meaning has to come from how you perceive the loop. Do you find meaning in the repetition itself, in the sort of eternal familiarity of your fate? Or is knowing about the repetition the ultimate source of despair?
It represents the ultimate acceptance of destiny, perhaps, but it leaves that philosophical door open, just a crack, for how you choose to witness that destiny unfolding again and again and again. So what does your unbendable circle look like? And how do you assert your own consistent identity against its rigidity?
A really challenging thought to take away this week. Thank you for taking this deep dive into 8 lines of destiny with us. We hope Sharbell's perspective on the unbendable circle gives you something to reflect on regarding your own relationship with fate and time.